In 1962, the world was introduced to a cinematic icon that endures to this day. Here's my review of the first James Bond movie, Dr. No. Hey guys, how are you? Let's get on with the first in a series of reviews featuring every official James Bond movie in the series. 24 movies at present, hopefully 25 by the time this series is finished. Now, I'm a big James Bond fan, as you can probably see from the pictures. I've got loads of memorabilia. I've got the films on every single format: VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, digital download. I absolutely love James Bond, so going through these movies is going to be an absolute pleasure for the next few months. Dr. No is the first in the official series of James Bond movies. It was directed by Terence and starred Sean Connery, Ursula Andress, Joseph Wiseman and Jack Lord. Characters that would become series regulars, Lois Maxwell, Bernard Lee, are here in very, very minor roles, which is how, in my opinion, these characters should be. We'll get on to that further into the series. So the movie starts where an incident happens in Jamaica. Strangways, an agent who is working on the island, disappears, and 007 is sent to investigate. Dr. No was the first in the official series of James Bond movies, and it was pretty faithfully adapted from the 6th James Bond novel, Dr. No, which Ian Fleming wrote in 1958. The reasons the producers chose this movie is it was pretty straightforward to transfer to a cinematic movie. It didn't require lots of special effects, it didn't require masses of stunts, and it was pretty much set in one location. This was all filmed pretty much on location in Jamaica, which was an absolutely beautiful setting and still is today, and one where in the 60s many people wouldn't actually get to see, so they saw something that was absolutely mind-blowing to them. So while in Jamaica, 007 investigates what happened to Strangways, and it's pretty obvious that he was murdered. And all the evidence points to Dr. No. Dr. No is a Chinese character that has his own private island, Crab Key, and no one will take 007 there, so he enlists the help of Quarrel, who takes him to the island to investigate. This is where he meets Honey Rider, played by Ursula Andress. Ursula Andress is the quintessential Bond girl, and despite what a lot of people seem to think, she didn't come bursting out of the ocean and walk up to the beach. When we first encounter her, she is leaving the ocean. She doesn't actually burst out of the ocean. That was Halle Berry in Die Another Day. We'll get on to that one later on in the series. Bond and Honey are held prisoner by Dr. No in a swanky swish prison that is more like a hotel than a prison. Dr. No is, in my opinion, one of the better James Bond movies. It introduced us to this world, and it is a very simplistic movie. Things I like about this movie is that you actually get to see 007 played by Sean Connery, and he is absolutely fantastic in the role. Despite initial reservations by Ian Fleming of Connery being cast, Connery absolutely hits the ball out of the park with his performance. He nails Bond from the very first moment we see him on screen, which is such an absolute moment that it is crazy even to this day. Ursula Andress plays Honey with a lot of innocence and anger, but the only thing I don't personally like is the fact that she was dubbed and we didn't get to hear Ursula Andress' own voice. Other characters of note, we've got Jack Lord playing Felix Leiter, who'd become the first in a long series of people playing this character. We're introduced to him when he's spying on James Bond when he arrives on the island, and throughout the movie we see him spying on James Bond. We don't actually know who he is until later on in the bar, where Pussfella and Felix Leiter find out that James Bond is working for the British government and he works for the CIA. Pussfella is a character which is quite comical in that the translation from book to screen here changes the meaning of his name. So his name is Pussfella, and there's a comment in the bar scene where Pussfella is holding 007 and he's told not to try and escape because Pussfella wrestles alligators. Now in the novel the line made more sense because it was Pussfella wrestles octopus, which makes more sense, Pussfella. Wrestling alligators makes absolutely no sense, and it's a trivial little thing, but it always niggles on me because why they just couldn't leave it to be octopus, I don't know. Quarrel, one of the guys that helps 007 throughout the movie, is played by John Kitzmiller, and unfortunately, because of the way the world was in the 1960s, there's a very slight amount of racism here in that Bond is ordering the guy around like he's some sort of slave. Get my shoes, fetch this, do that, and it kind of makes it a little bit sour now to watch, although you have to understand that this film was made at the time of recording this video 55 years ago, so you can kind of excuse it slightly, but even so now it doesn't quite work Bernard Lee and Lois Maxwell, who play the MI6 crew here, do an admirable job. They're only getting a very, very short amount of screen time, but straight away you can tell that M is this grumpy guy that Bond works for and knows on a semi-personal basis. And the flirting with Moneypenny seems quite natural here, whereas in later movies it seems quite forced and just trying to shoehorn in innuendo. In terms of the villains, Professor Dent plays a big part in the first half of the movie, and there's a particularly brilliant scene where Bond is waiting at some woman's house that he's just nailed, and he's waiting for Professor Dent to turn up to murder him. When he does, Bond is hiding behind the door with his gun and cold-bloodedly just shoots him in the back. It's an absolutely fantastic scene, and it really sets the tone for how this character is going to be portrayed over the coming movies. You also have Dr. No, who's the big bad of the movie, who really doesn't get a lot of screen time. You don't see him until well into the sort of later stages of the movie, and when you do, he's only got a few scenes. Dr. No has no actual hands due to an accident with nuclear power, so has sort of claws inside these gloves that you really don't see very often. Kind of like Danny DeVito's Penguin in Batman Returns. And it leads to his demise later in the movie. He's played pretty well by Joseph Wiseman, although no way on earth does he ever pass for being Chinese, but again, I suppose prosthetics and so forth back in the day were not what they are now. In terms of special effects, we do get a couple of explosions and a lot of rear projection work when they're driving, which now looks really bad, but at the time it probably looked really, really impressive. We do get a lot of action, although it doesn't actually get into the way the story actually works with the story, which is something I particularly liked. And in terms of the stunts, there's not masses of stunt work. We get a couple of high falls, but bearing in mind this was the early 60s, this would have been pretty impressive at the time. The production design by Ken Adam is fantastic. The sets he designs are breathtaking. They have big scope and they really do tell the story, and he would only get more creative and more ambitious as the series moves. Other elements that would become staples of the series are present here. We have the opening gun barrel, which was done absolutely brilliantly by Maurice Binder, and is an element that has survived through various incarnations, but pretty faithfully even up to this day, and hopefully will do for years to come. It's been tweaked a few times here and there, but on the whole it's still the same effect that was done back then. The music by Monty Norman is typical 60s music. It doesn't necessarily always work perfectly within the movie, although it does evoke reactions and you do get a sense of danger. And the James Bond theme is played quite a lot throughout, which really does ingrain this into your consciousness. The opening credits are here and we go straight into them from the opening gun barrel. Maurice Binder, who created the gun barrel and the initial credits, would become synonymous with the James Bond credits, doing the opening titles for the majority of the movies up until 1989. So a lot of the elements are in place for the series. They would become tweaked and honed over the next few movies before really hitting their stride, but we have a very solid initial outing for 007 here. Dr. No is one of my personal favourite movies. It isn't my favourite, but it is very high up on my list. I think it's a very good introduction to the world. Performance as Sean Connery is brilliant, as are the majority of the rest of the cast. The cinematography is lovely, directed perfectly by Terence Young, who I can't give enough credit to, and big thanks to Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, who fought to get this movie to the cinema. Initially no one wanted to produce this movie until United Artists stepped in and said, okay, here we go, here's $1 million. Dr. No, 55 years later, still holds up against current Bond movies and is a stronger entry into the series than some of the more recent Bond movies. I think Dr. No is an absolutely fantastic movie. It's not the best in the series, but it is an absolutely stellar start into the 007 series. I'm going to give Dr. No 4.5 out of 5. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate you spending a bit of time watching these movies, and the series of James Bond reviews will go on monthly until we have exhausted the entire catalogue of official movies. Hopefully round about the time Bond 25 hits the cinemas. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and I'll see you next month for From Russia with Love.